Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope blog and podcast. I'm here with your host, Danielle Richardson. And, I'm so blessed today. I'm speaking with Andrew Brunson. That name may sound familiar to you. He was actually in a Turkish prison for 2 years, from 2016 to 2018. And he actually wrote a book on it called God's Hostage. Um, and he actually has a ministry now with his wife, Norine, called Wave Starters, which is focused on the persecuted church as well as leadership, um, and the Muslim world in general. Andrew, I want to, first thank you so much for taking the time to pop on here.
Well, I'm glad to be with you, Danielle.
So, Andrew, I want to, before starting out, I want to ask, just for people who are interested in your ministry, Wave Starters, because when I looked at the website, it said a little bit about what you do, but it was very short. It didn't give too many details. What is when it talks about persecuted church, the Muslim world? What is Wave Starters doing exactly for those things?
Well, I kind of became a poster boy or poster child for the persecuted church because so much attention was given to my case. And so people prayed for me all around the world. In fact, a historian told me that this was an unprecedented prayer movement. There had not been another prayer movement where so many people in so many countries prayed for one person. And
Mm,
so I think this kind of highlighted the idea of religious persecution, especially of Christians, because there is religious persecution in many, but the majority of those
yeah.
being persecuted actually are Christian. And so we highlight that a bit. And because of my own experience as suffering persecution, the imprisonment that I went through, which was very difficult for me, then I have a place in my heart, especially to minister to people who are persecuted. Also, we were in Turkey for 25 years, and Turkey is a Muslim country, and there is pressure on people who become followers of Jesus there. So it's something that we've dealt with for many years. As far as Muslims, well, we have been focused on Muslims for many years. As I said, 25 years in Turkey, many of those working with starting churches among Turks. And so we still love Muslims. We're still involved in the Muslim world. And our website doesn't say a lot because that's intentional because some of the places we work are sensitive. And I also got a very bad profile because of all the propaganda about me in Turkey that kind of spread throughout the Muslim world. So we try to keep a low profile.
So, Andrew, tell for people who may not know about it, especially maybe the more younger generation coming in. Can you talk about the propaganda and why you ended up in prison? Because you were a pastor in Turkey at the time, right?
So Noreen and I were in Turkey primarily starting churches. This means that I had to pastor churches that we started. And so I did do pastoral work. The government in Turkey knew very well what we were doing because it was out in the open. Everything we did was in public. After doing that for 23 years, I think they wanted to make an example of somebody, and they chose me. They could have chosen one of my friends, but they chose me. And one of the things that happened is that they used me as to kind of project onto me all of the distrust, dislike, hatred toward Christians in the culture. And so they said that I was a spy, a terrorist, and basically someone who hates Turks and is betraying the country as a traitor and wants to destroy it. And
Mm,
so obviously none of that was true. And there were many false accusations against me from the government, and they knew very well that it wasn't true, but it was part of a concerted, program with media, which was all in line with the government to justify keeping me as a prisoner, and also just kind of letting all that animus toward Christians out. They're saying it about me, but it applies to the rest of the believers in the country. Turkey has a very small Christian population. From a Turkish
mm.
background, every Turkey is a Muslim country, and there may be 7 or 8 thousand believers from a Muslim background, or followers of Jesus from a Muslim background, out of 85 million. So it's a very small church.
Hmm. Were you, is it true that you were in prison for a year without being charged yet?
It was longer than that. Uh, I was held for 18 months before they charged me, and then they uh, put me on trial. My wife just showed up, so she will come and sit next to me. This is Norine. So yeah, it was, but they can hold you for 7 years without trial. So yeah.
Now, how did it feel for you, to not, like, to be falsely accused that and not really having the voice to speak out and being separated from your family, put in prison, not even on any sort of charge? I mean, how did that feel? You think we know the spiritual truths that we hold on to as believers in times of trouble, but how did you feel from a human perspective as you're like, here I am, I've been serving the Lord faithfully, and all of a sudden I'm in prison for things I didn't do, and the people that I serve and love are the people that have put me in prison. I mean, how did that feel?
Well, I had a whole range of emotions, of very negative emotions, and the truth is that I sometimes I was very angry. I was desperate. I was had a sense of hopelessness also, and of despair, because I didn't know if they were going to ever release me. Uh, I was in prison for 2 years, but the Turkish government wanted to give me 3 life sentences. So I didn't know if I would ever be released and be with my family again. And that uncertainty just devoured me inside. So emotionally, I was a basket case. And uh, what surprised me also is that I broke under the pressures. The fear that I had led to a lot of the release of stress hormones in my body, which kept me from sleeping. So sleep deprivation, the isolation when I was in solitary confinement for a time,
Mm,
those things started to break me down. I lost 50 pounds. I was had wave after wave of panic attacks as the stress hormones just kind of overwhelmed my body's natural tranquilizers after a time. And so I broke under that isolation and sleep deprivation and fear and the uncertainty. But I also broke spiritually. And that's where the emotional side comes in, that I felt my expectation uh, of my expectations of God were not met. He didn't,
mm,
I was disappointed in him because I expected, just from reading biographies, and some of my spiritual heroes have gone through difficulties like this. And I expected from all of my reading that, well, I'd just be filled with a sense of peace and grace and of strength and joy. And I didn't have that. I had no sense of God's presence. And so I was
mm,
very surprised by that. I knew intellectually that I'm being persecuted, and that the what I'm suffering is a result of persecution. But the issue of the heart was what I couldn't understand is where is God in the midst of this? The feeling betrayed and
yeah.
abandoned by God. Now, he didn't do that, but that's very much how it felt. And that took me into spiritual crisis. And together with the emotional, psychological, physical breaking, then I was suicidal during my first year and very broken. And the story of my imprisonment is that breaking. And I think many of the uh, I think God allowed me to be broken so thoroughly and repeatedly because He wanted me to learn some things. I needed to strengthen myself in very difficult circumstances when I was on my
Mm,
own. I was the only Christian, and strengthen myself so that I could remain faithful. And some of the things I learned, I think, are applicable for people now who are suffering persecution, and also for the United States, where I think there is going to be persecution in the future. And God did rebuild me during my second year. But at first I went through a lot of breaking.
I think just from things he has told me, there was also frustration. This wasn't the primary thing, but there was definitely frustration because it was just an unclear situation. We didn't know what they
Yeah.
were accusing. They weren't saying. There was a lot of silence. And finally, when they decided to bring charges, then the case was, the folder was sealed. And so we couldn't see what they were actually bringing against us. So there was no way to prepare, nothing to do, just a lot of waiting and uncertainty. And another thing that I remember Andrew telling me at the time, around that time, is that it was difficult because if they had just straight out accused him of, we're coming against you because you're a Christian, because of what you're doing. In a sense, that would be easier.
You're evil because you're a Christian. You've been
Right.
starting churches. You've been, then, and because of that, you're in prison. I still wouldn't like prison, but I would have felt more like, okay, it's very
Yes,
clear.
this is me. This is,
Yes.
I am guilty of these things, if you will. But as so often happens, Christians are actually falsely accused and false charges are brought. And, we see that in the Bible. They're trying to gather people who will lie about Jesus or people who will say things. And so that's hard because then there are a lot of things that are being said that are so far from the truth. And
Yeah.
anyway,
And of course, they knew that they were falsehoods. They knew that those things were not true, uh, because this was run at a very high level in the Turkish government, and they knew it wasn't true, but they did it anyway. So that's very frustrating. But picking up on one of the things Norine said is, I think, people are concerned here in the United States, for example, if we say what God says. We're supposed to say what God says. It's a very simple principle. If God says something is sin, I'm supposed to say it's sin. If he says it's good, I'm supposed to say it's good. People sometimes say if I say what God says on controversial issues, then people are going to think I'm unloving, I'm a bigot, I'm, a terrible person. And that's true, actually. That is what's going to happen. It's not that we're unloving or bigoted, it's or full of hate, but we will be accused of that. It would be too easy for us if they just said, "Hey, you're saying what Jesus said, so I hate you." They
Yeah.
won't say that.
Yeah.
They'll accuse you of being evil and hateful. And this is one of the things that people are going to have to face in the West that we haven't really faced in the past so much. That if you stand for truth, not that you're a culture warrior or something like that, but just standing on basic truth of the Bible, that people will accuse you of being evil.
Norine, how did it feel for you? All this confusion going on and your husband being in prison. Like, were you able to communicate with him at all? How did you walk with this,
yeah.
with the
When he
Lord,
was Yeah, when he got to actual prison, before that it was a different situation and, could we see each other or not? It was just all very vague and but once he got into actual prison, actually he had no right, as a foreigner accused of terrorism, he had no rights to visit. Except I had to get special permission for every visit. And so there was always that uncertainty, a little bit of uncertainty. Am I going to get the permission? Will it come in time before the visit? Will he see me? And if I don't show up, then I'm going to be worried because I know that he's worried that something has happened to me. I've been deported.
Let me just explain something. Every cell has a specific visiting time. And like Monday morning at 11:15 for half an hour. And so that's what she means, applying for permission for
Yeah.
that specific
Okay.
slot.
So if people of that cell have a visitor that day, that is the time that they could have a visit. And so I had to get, permission between each visit for the next one. So, yeah, that was stressful. It was good to see him, but it was very stressful to know how to encourage him. That was always a challenge. And, just what was the best way to go about. I didn't want to give him false hope. I wanted to speak truth. But the truth is, you don't know exactly how it's going to pan out.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. You say, oh, normally it should be resolved, it should get cleared up. But there was a sense early on that there was something going on here, and I didn't assume that it was going to just be quickly resolved in the way that it should have been. So yeah, uncertainty for me too. The difference is that I had believers with me. I'm on the outside, and
Yeah.
I have other people who are there, who are standing with me, who are praying with me, not just praying for me, but praying with me. And I just came to really appreciate the body of Christ, and just having people who will do that. So important.
Do you remember a particular time when you were really discouraged and the Lord met or comforted you there? Because it's interesting, Andrew, you're saying before about how God was present but silent. And so, I mean, it kind of brings to mind, I think it was written on the walls during the Holocaust, but it was somebody had written, I believe in God even when he is silent, because sometimes his presence just feels silent even though he's there. Um, for both of you, like, was there a tangible, even though God's presence may have been silent, like, did you see God's comfort in any way during this time for both of you in separate ways?
You can go ahead.
So, yes, I experienced the silence of God. I also had no sense of presence. So I felt that every way in which I had experienced God's love in the past was just cut off from me, and that it
Hmm.
was kind of a harsh time. As I look back on it, from this vantage point, having survived it and come out, then my perspective changes, and I can see some of the things that He was doing in my heart and reshaping me through that breaking process. But when I was going through it, I didn't have this sense of, oh yes, God is with me.
Hmm.
He's, or I should say, I didn't have a sense of his
Hmm.
personal concern for me. And I just
Yeah.
felt kind of abandoned, and I'm a pawn in a very big
Hmm.
game, and God is willing to expend me. And I don't, that's how I felt at the time. And then during my second year, there's a rebuilding of relationship, again, not with any sense of presence or it's still in that silence and what I would think of as darkness, but more of a softening of my heart because I was offended at God. I was very angry at him and
Yeah.
hurt. I was wounded. And when I'm wounded toward him, offended toward him, hurt by him, then this leads to all kinds of accusation. I'm accusing him. You're not faithful. You're not good. You're not loving. You're not true. Even questioning his existence. And here I'd been
Hmm.
starting churches, baptizing people, Muslims into the faith, and here I'm questioning whether God even exists because of this crisis I was going through. And so I can't remember what your question was,
Were
but
there times so that you
that's how it felt going through. And rather than think, oh, here are the times I felt comforted by God, what he was drawing me much more into was my focus on whether I'm comforted or not, whether I have a sense of presence or not, whether I hear his voice or not, or feel his love or not.
Hmm.
I'm going to be faithful. I need to embrace him. I need to go after him. And that was really uh, the I don't know what to call it right now. The pattern that I was drawn into of repeated discipline. I'm gonna love him even if I don't see his love.
You know, it's interesting because I'd feel like, the apostles, especially in scripture, I mean, that's what they would go through. And now in America, I think, especially in American culture, we do emphasize like the emotional part of spirituality, a huge part, feeling God, being close to him, feelings. And then when circumstances come when we don't feel anything, we're scared and we're that's like you said, we start doubting all of these things that we thought were true. And it's so interesting to see and to hear someone who does and has experienced a very long period of not feeling positive emotions about God at all. And yet here you are coming through that, still believing that he is good and maybe stronger for it, which is just, I mean, it's an encouragement to believers, I think, especially. Norine, I did want to just go back to you on that, though. For you as the wife and not being in prison, you said you had more of a community, which was probably a huge gift, as you mentioned. What tangible things were you experiencing, or similar to Andrew, did you feel like God was just there, but you could not feel his presence? You could not experience any of that comfort during that time?
So I didn't, probably Andrew has a greater sense of the Lord's presence, or maybe in a different way than I do. And so
Mm.
that really wasn't so much an issue for me, in the same way. Um, you can jump in if you want to add anything to that. Um, it was definitely difficult. I didn't, how could I answer his questions? Was the Lord not giving him what he seemed to need so much at the time? It was just really hard to watch him go through that, and come to some very, very low points. At the same time, there were a few times that I can remember thinking, like we'd gotten some bad, like the case had taken a worse turn, let's say. And I remember, just I was out walking and kind of felt like, oh, my spirit's lifted. And I thought, somebody, like, I should be feeling worse right now. Somebody must be praying for me. There's something that here that is beyond me. And so that did happen, sometimes. I do remember, there is some rejoicing in the persecution, in feeling like I don't need to explain it to Jesus, like, Jesus, but I'm just saying to him, like, I don't need to explain the whole situation, but I'm just saying, Jesus, this is for you. Like, the rejoicing that I'm getting to do this for you,
Hmm.
actually.
Yeah.
We read about persecution. We read about people who do things, and saying, right now, I am one of the ones who gets to do this for you. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good, but we get to do this for you. And so there's this sense of, uh, this joy in being able to give him this kind of a gift.
I want to say something about the emotional side. I'm an emotional person. Emotions are an important part of relationship with God. I also had, I think, uh, an idealistic view of suffering. And I think we often run into this in books, but also just in popular Christian culture, that the negative emotions, if you're doing well with God, you're just not going to have those negative emotions. And I'm thinking of
Think the Psalms within one Psalm.
I'm thinking of
Yeah.
one time I was really complaining to Norine, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's really struggling, and you know, God sends an angel to minister to Jesus. And I'm thinking, hey, why not me? I'm really struggling. I'm really broken. I think I'm going to be, here for the rest of my life in an isolated cell in a Turkish prison and not see my family again, be with my children again. I'm really broken and feeling that loss. And why doesn't God send me an angel? Jesus has all these advantages. He's the Son of God. He knows he's returning to heaven. He has the right perspective. I don't have those things. I need that help. And why doesn't he give that to me in my darkness? And she said, well, Andrew, go back and read the rest of the passage. What happens after the angel comes and ministers to Jesus? Well, he still is under this
Yeah.
just tremendous burden and suffering, still crying out, "Oh Lord, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done." In other words, the angel ministers to him and strengthens him, but he still has those intense the agony he's going through. That didn't take it
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And I kind of expected, this idealism, well, I'll just have grace fall upon me and I'll go through
Easily.
without, yes. And I found out, no, actually grace is not an anesthetic. You can have grace and still feel uh, a lot of darkness and be very discouraged and feel pain and feel
Very
suffering.
true. Yeah.
Grace doesn't take it away. I think the grace can help me to get through it, but it doesn't take away the suffering.
At times it does do. At times there's a miraculous breakthrough, and somebody will have the kind of grace that they don't feel the pain that they normally would be feeling. There will be that level of grace. But I think that for me also that
I didn't experience that.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And I think that I was surprised that that I didn't feel the grace more. It was there. It was at work. It was at work in both of us. Actually, it undoubtedly was. But just thinking that it would somehow help us feel better during the experience, and it didn't so much. So that was, yeah, that was a disappointment for me. But it was there and it did bring us through. The result is good.
And you were speaking about emotions, how many people now are very much driven by emotion. And as I said, I'm an emotional person, but I had to set aside my emotions. And for example, one of my disciplines is saying, I choose to turn my eyes toward Jesus. I choose to turn toward him and not away. And I can be feel like I'm very much in darkness, feeling abandoned, feel like, where is your faithfulness? Where is your love? But I have to, so if I were just operating from my emotions, then I would be that wouldn't drive me to run after Jesus. I would just stay in the darkness. But I say, in spite of my emotions, I use my will. I choose with my will to turn toward you and not away. And sometimes I'm very weak and I could only turn toward him 1 degree. But turning toward him 1 degree makes all the difference in the world from turning away from him 1 degree, because it positions me, if I'm turning toward him, that I can receive from him, even if I don't feel it. And I emphasize this when I speak sometimes because, I say, however dark your darkness may be, however discouraged or depressed you may be, there's still enough willpower within you that you can choose to turn toward Jesus, even if it's just 1 degree. You can make that choice. And so I was learning throughout my time there to stand in the dark, to lean into God, in spite of my emotions, whatever my emotions or my circumstances may be.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the grace, it's like the Holy Spirit sustains and gives that grace even to turn that degree. To be able to do that even sometimes is just the work of the Holy Spirit giving you the power to
And
do
you may
that.
not be aware of it. And that's my emphasis is, yes, like I especially focus on my faithfulness because that was my lived experience. That's what I was really battling with, day after day. Am I going to be faithful? I choose to be faithful. I choose to run after you. And so that's my experience. That's what I'm focused on. Now, underlying that is God's faithfulness, but I'm not aware of it necessarily.
Yeah.
His faithfulness is there, enabling me to be faithful, but it doesn't mean that I feel it or that I see it or sense it or am aware of it in any way. But it's there. But if you're looking for the, oh wow, what a display of faithfulness, I'm so encouraged, that may be there. There are many times it is.
Yeah.
But there's going to be some time in your life where you won't see that. And that's part of the urgency I have in my heart in the US, especially as I think the environment is changing and there's going to be a lot more hostility toward faithful followers of Jesus, is what happens when you are in difficulty and you say, where are you, God? And don't have his presence. Are you still going to be faithful? Are you going to
endure?
Are you going to endure, persevere? And one of the things that it came down to for me is I felt like, I have all these questions of God. God has questions for me. Andrew, are you going to love me when you don't see my love? Are you going to be faithful when you don't see my faithfulness?
Yeah.
And uh, that's a big challenge. When you feel like you're in the dark, are you still going to stand and lean into him?
Norine, how did you care for the kids at the time? Like, how did you explain this? And I'm sure they had questions. Like, how did you walk with them through this?
Yeah. So they were all stateside, and I was glad that they were safely out of Turkey. Um, but I was sad that we were literally uh, five of us were in five different places. And so
Two of them were in
two of
college.
them were in college, different parts of the country, and the youngest one was with my in-laws finishing high school. Yet another part in the country. So I wanted to be with them to support them at this time. But it wasn't possible to be in every place, obviously. And what I tried to do is, for one, I tried to soften it to them and not tell them how dark
How
anxious
much I was
thoughts
struggling.
were. Yeah.
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 Because I thought that's too much for them to take at this point, when it's all done. As if there is a good answer, good outcome,
And yeah.
then we can let them know. But as it turns out, they had guessed. They had guessed, so that he could be suicidal, and one of our kids, yeah, just very empathetic, and he could just imagine how it would be feeling. So it was difficult. I tried to give them the right perspective. I tried to say, look, this is persecution. We can expect it, even
Mm.
though we ourselves didn't see it coming in this form. And what we need to do actually is forgive. And doesn't mean that we can do it right away, but that should actually be our goal. So I was trying to give them the right perspective,
So
and support them from where I was.
in the first year, that's when things were especially dark for me. As Noreen said, I was struggling with suicide. I was just almost just I was so
Just
focused
trying
on
to
just
survive.
surviving.
Sure.
And then in
Yeah.
the second year, there's that rebuilding of my heart. And one of the steps in the rebuilding is Noreen said to me, Andrew, you need to be a father again. Because as I said, I was so focused, just on surviving, that I wasn't able to, I wasn't doing, thinking of my children. I was thinking of them, but I wasn't relating to them as I
Yeah.
needed to. And so, uh, I was transferred to a different prison where they allowed me to write letters in English to them. I couldn't at the previous one, and I started to, kind of think about that. What if I don't get out of here? What if this is the rest of my life? What kind of legacy am I going to leave for my kids? And
Mm.
that was one of the things that helped me to start refocusing and processing. What is the right way to look at this? As Noreen said, what is the right perspective? What does it mean, you know, uh, to be persecuted for the sake of Jesus, the
Yeah.
significance of this. How should we respond? What should be their response? And as Noreen mentioned, forgiving. Is it worth it? Is it worth the price that we're paying? And just
Yeah.
starting to process through that and help tell them how I think they should think about these things, the perspective they should have. Well, it was good for them, and it was also very good for me because
Mm.
it started to force me to think through this and process it in a different way.
Your first year in the prison, I mean, what was it like? What was your daily life like in the prison?
I remember him saying that one day in prison feels like 10 days. It's very slow. It feels very long because nothing is happening. But go ahead.
No, I mean it's
You don't leave the cell.
well, I wrote a whole book about it, so
But just summarize
yeah.
some things.
Well, I was in solitary confinement for 50 days to start, and that's where some of the breaking started. Then I was put uh, into a high security prison, and the cell I was put into was built for 8 people. There were 22, 23 of us in there. You don't leave the cell. So it's crowded and tense. And I was the only Christian, and I was kept always with people who are very, very committed Muslims. So it was a very intense spiritual environment for me because there was 24/7, there was some kind of Islamic worship or prayer going on. You know, they were desperate to get out, and they thought the way to do that was to, press into the practice of Islam more and more.
Mm.
So I was very isolated. Uh, when I was in solitary confinement, that was very difficult. Now I'm in a very crowded cell. I'm not alone, but I'm still isolated in many ways by my culture, my life experience is different, my nationality, but especially spiritually as the only follower of Jesus there. And
Mm.
so uh, it was daily life was just very dull and tedious and long, and dealing with a lot of the fear and uh, again, that uncertainty, what's going to happen? Will I get
Yeah.
out of here? What are the next steps? And so that just kind of ate away at me. Eventually, they allowed me to have a Bible, and that was helpful, but not as it was. Didn't make things easy. People think, well, you had a Bible. Yes, that's what I most wanted to have, as far as, that could help me in prison. But it didn't fill me always with good feelings, if you're
Yeah.
looking at the emotional side. And eventually, they also allowed me to have books, which for many months I couldn't have any. And so time passes very slowly, and I thought sometimes I would lose my mind. You know, uh, Finally, when I was allowed to have some books, that was a lifesaver. I was able to read some biographies, Christian books, and other books just to keep my mind, do something with my time.
Yeah. Did you experience
Then
any? Well, I was gonna say, did you experience any
I was
physical?
eventually transferred to maximum security. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I did not have any, I didn't have any physical abuse there. Eventually, I was moved to maximum security, and I think that was for my own protection, because once the Turkish government started to pump out propaganda about me, then some people in my cell, I think, started to look at me differently.
Mm.
They're saying I hate Turks. I'm a CIA agent or the director of the CIA in the Middle East, and I've been trying to, divide Turkey and set up, anyway, it was just crazy stuff. And so there was a lot more tension in the cell
Yeah.
then, and eventually they moved me and put me into maximum security where I uh, I didn't have as many cellmates, and that was where my rebuilding took place, was in the maximum security prison.
What was it? What was the day like when you got to leave and go home?
Well, it was a roller coaster emotionally, because I was on trial, and this was the fourth trial date. And the way they do trials in Turkey is you'll have one day in court, and then maybe 3 months later you have the second day, and a few months later the third meeting. So it can go on for a long time. This was the fourth trial date, and uh, they moved very quickly to. They convicted me, so I'm a convicted terrorist. And they sentenced me. And I thought, here, there's been all this pressure, the U.S. government, tremendous pressure that they placed on Turkey, and their economy had suffered tremendously because of this. And they still, they still won't release me. And now, after all this pressure, including, from President Trump, a great deal of involvement, an unprecedented degree of involvement by a president, and they're going to convict me and send me back to prison. So I have no hope. And then suddenly they say, well, we've sentenced you to prison. Now we're going to let you out while you appeal the sentence, and you're allowed to leave the country while you appeal. So basically, it's a face-saving way. after
You're
holding me for 2
guilty,
years.
but you can go away now.
He served some time
Yeah.
and for good behavior during that time. Yeah.
No, I mean, so it
Anyway.
was a face-saving way of saying we were justified in holding this man for 2 years because look, he is a terrorist. We've convicted him, but then the release, and so it went from, the roller coaster of, oh no, I'm convicted, I'm sentenced. Suddenly I'm released, and a day later we're in the White House.
My goodness, when did you like get to see your family, well, like your wife? Because did you get to like hug her and
Oh, absolutely. And when we landed in the States,
Yeah, we traveled back together.
actually
We left
okay.
the president sent an Air Force plane to get us out of there very quickly, because no one was prepared for my release that day. I didn't know I was going to be released until the moment I was released. And they
Wow.
sent an Air Force plane to try to get us out of there as quickly as possible because,
just in case
the
anybody
leaders
would
there could change their
their
minds
mind.
and put me
Yeah.
back into prison. So it was.
So we left the country together. We arrived in the States and had just our kids were waiting for us at the airport. And so we just had time just with them, with no media or anything else like that. And that was an amazing time. Yeah.
Hmm. Probably lots of tears, I would think, and hugging and
Sure.
kissing and yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then it was a short time because then we were on to the White House. So this was this day of just roller coaster of emotions. And it's almost like surreal, almost like happening to someone else because you can't quite, you don't have time to process it all, I guess, right in the moment.
Were
But it was
you,
wonderful.
I was gonna ask Andrew though, were you hungry when you were released? Like, did you want some food? Like
Uh,
actual good food?
the truth is that I didn't really think about food that much. I had a lot of dreams where I was eating food that I liked, but in my waking moments, I didn't think about that because I felt like I didn't really complain about my physical conditions there either. It was more, I'm missing my family. This is what's dominating. I want to be with Norine. I want to see my kids again. I want freedom to just do, not to do extravagant things like take an amazing vacation. Where are the places I want to go? No, so I just want to be able to sit in a park,
But when you
and just
could
sit
do
there.
that, I guess when you could do that,
Yeah.
when you got on the plane and you were at the president's office, like, did your stomach, did something, because and this is maybe just a human sinful response. I don't know. It's not very spiritual, but I feel like I'd really want like a burger or something that's like real meat or something. If I had been 2 years on prison food, I would be so hungry.
Well, what happened is once I got back to the States, I had lost 50 pounds and I gained it all back. So
Okay.
yes, I enjoyed my food here too much.
That's good then. Um, and you said you met the president, and I guess it was basically like, we're glad you're back kind of thing.
Um, well, we were invited to the White House, and we were very grateful to him because, as I said, he was involved in many, many details. A number of times he requested my release
Yeah.
directly from the Turkish president, and so I was very, very grateful. And so our family, we were invited to the White House, and we had the opportunity to pray for him, which is something that had been on Norine's heart especially. And
Hmm.
so, yeah.
Why especially for you, Noreen, did you want to pray for him?
Just because I'd had a dream about doing that 2 or 3 months
Oh.
earlier. And I woke up, yeah, I'd had a dream of being across from him, sitting in an armchair, and I'm across from him, trying to pray for him, trying to pray out of Isaiah 11. sevenfold spirit. And so I felt that I needed to be praying that. And if I ever had a chance to see him in person, that I would want to pray that over him. So it was just kind of a
Wow.
fulfillment dream, I guess.
Hmm.
So I just felt God was in it. There was a confidence that I didn't make this up. God was in it.
Hmm. Well, you know, Andrew, Norine, I want to be respectful of your time. Just one last question. What do you think? How should believers pray for the persecuted church? Because we often pray, please let them become free. Please let them return to their homes. Please help them to receive the needs that they have. These are all good prayers. But like you said, a lot of times God doesn't take away circumstances. So even though we're praying so much for the circumstances to end, they may not end for a long time. They may end soon. You don't know. How can believers be praying in a spiritually powerful way for people who are enduring suffering in other countries?
Well, I think, I wanted people to be praying for Andrew's release, you know.
Oh yeah,
Um,
sure.
so I would not, unless the Lord is giving an indication, and of course, yeah, holding it with balancing it out with, Lord, what is your will in this situation? And I think that Andrew's mom actually had a very interesting response some weeks into his imprisonment. There was a prayer meeting she was at in the States, and they were praying for his release. And all of a sudden, she suddenly had uh, this thought, wait, we might be praying for the wrong
Well,
thing.
more than a thought. She stood up and stopped them and
She
told
said,
them.
I think that we need to pray that before he is released, God will accomplish everything that he wants to accomplish through this, through the imprisonment.
Hmm.
And she went on to list what she thought that was. So, that's an unusual perspective for sure. And there's no question that God is accomplishing things. Having said that, we would still want prayer for release, and then the Lord decides. The disciples were praying for Peter to be released. They were all praying.
So I'll tell you first that knowing that people were praying for me was the most encouraging
Yeah,
thing that I could hear in prison.
yeah.
And I
Yeah.
would ask Norine often, are people praying for me?
Are they still praying?
And
Yeah.
it's not that I didn't feel the prayer, but knowing that people were praying for me, it helped to know that I wasn't forgotten, that I wasn't, and that was one of my big fears. Life will go on, and I'll be left here in prison, and everyone will forget about me. But knowing people were praying for me just gave me a sense of connection to other believers, and
For
it
your
was
release specifically, or for endurance, or just anything,
just,
anything.
just knowing that they were praying for me. And I'm going to tell you what I would pray for people, but just knowing that they were praying for me was an encouragement.
That you are being brought before the Lord
Yeah.
regularly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Lord, remember. Of course, he doesn't forget,
So
but
there was that. It just made me feel I'm not alone. I'm alone in this cell, but I'm not alone in the sense there are people standing with me.
Yeah.
And may God hear their prayers, and may those prayers be used to strengthen me. As for how I would pray for people, so I'm going to pray what I prayed for myself. And this is a prayer that I prayed often for myself, and I prayed for my family. So I'd say, Father God, pour out on me, pour out on, I pray for my family as well, for my wife, for my children, pour out on us, um, your sons and daughters, the courage and the strength and the hope and the strength, sorry, the courage and the hope and the strength and the confidence and the perseverance and endurance and steadfastness of Jesus, so that we may run the race set before us and finish well. A beautiful bride, purified in the fires of faithful obedience, tested and found worthy of her beloved, of Jesus, the King of glory. So pour into them the Spirit of Jesus, the strength, the hope, the perseverance of Jesus, so that they will be able to run the race, so that they will remain faithful, so that they'll finish well. in a way that's worthy of Jesus. And so that is how I pray for people who are being persecuted. Of course, I want them to have a sense of presence. I pray for that. I want them to be released, but especially I pray that they remain faithful.
Hmm. Well, Norine and Andrew, thank you so much. And again, for listeners, you're listening to Norine and Andrew Brunson. Andrew's been talking about his 2-year imprisonment in Turkey, and him and his wife talking about their experiences. And if you want to hear more about Andrew, he has written a book, God's Hostage, which I highly recommend, which will go into way more detail than we could talk about in an hour interview. So I
Can I
highly
add some?
encourage that. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
There's actually, we have a video series called Prepare to Stand. It's free, and it's taking some of the things that we learned through this process, how to strengthen ourselves. And basically, this is especially for people here in the States. How do we prepare ourselves for the pressure that's coming so that when the pressure comes, we stand faithful? And so I would recommend it to your listeners. If you just Google my name, Andrew Brunson, Prepare to Stand, the series will come up in 2 or 3 different places.
Wonderful. Well, Andrew and Norine, thank you so much again. It's been a gift to talk with you.
Okay, blessings to you.